She moved into my home demanding half of everything my grandmother left me, claiming family rights she never earned. What Margaret Thornton didn't know was that my lawyer had been quietly investigating her financial history for months, and what we discovered would not only save my inheritance, but expose a decades-long pattern of elder abuse that would land her in federal prison. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a courier who required my signature and photo identification before placing the thick manila envelope into my trembling hands. The return address bore the name of Whitman, Blackstone and Associates, a prestigious law firm in downtown Portland that specialized in estate litigation and family disputes. As I stood in the doorway of the Victorian home my grandmother had left me just 6 months earlier, I had no idea that this letter would transform me from grieving granddaughter into a woman who would ultimately expose one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes in Oregon's legal history. My name is Caroline Elizabeth Hayes, and before this letter changed everything, I believed I understood my family dynamics, my legal rights, and the straightforward nature of inheritance law. I was a 34-year-old graphic designer who had moved back to Riverside Falls after my grandmother's death to manage her estate and decide whether to keep the family home that had been in our family for 4 generations. The house held memories of childhood summers, holiday gatherings, and the final precious months I had spent caring for Grandma Rose during her battle with cancer. Margaret Thornton, my late husband's mother, had been conspicuously absent during those difficult final months, when I juggled my freelance design work with medical appointments, medication schedules, and the emotional demands of watching someone I loved slip away gradually. She had visited exactly twice during the 8 months of Grandma Rose's illness, both times bringing legal documents that she claimed needed signatures for insurance purposes and medical directives. I had found her behavior strange at the time, particularly her insistence on speaking privately with my grandmother, and her apparent discomfort with my presence during these conversations. But nothing had prepared me for the contents of the letter I now held in my shaking hand. The legal language was dense and intimidating, filled with phrases like rightful inheritance claims, undue influence allegations, and a state contest proceeding. According to the documents, Margaret Thornton was formally challenging my grandmother's will, claiming that I had manipulated an elderly woman into leaving me property and assets that rightfully belonged to the broader family. She was demanding a 50% share of everything, including the house, the antique collection, the investment accounts, and even my grandmother's jewelry. The accusations were as shocking as they were false. The letter alleged that I had isolated my grandmother from other family members, convinced her to change her will under suspicious circumstances, and exploited her declining mental state to secure an inheritance I had not earned. Margaret claimed to have evidence of financial impropriety, witness statements about my allegedly manipulative behavior, and medical documentation suggesting that my grandmother had not been competent to make estate decisions during her final months. Reading these accusations felt like being punched in the stomach by someone wearing brass knuckles. Every word was carefully chosen to paint me as a predatory relative who had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. The legal filing suggested that I was exactly the kind of person society should protect seniors against: the greedy family member who swoops in during times of weakness to steal inheritances from more deserving relatives. The timing of this legal challenge was particularly cruel. I was still processing my grief over losing the woman who had been more like a mother to me than a grandmother, still adjusting to life in a house filled with memories, and still dealing with the overwhelming administrative tasks that follow someone's death. Now I was being forced to defend my character, my relationship with my grandmother, and my legal right to inherit property that had been left to me through a properly executed will. But what made Margaret's challenge even more disturbing was her demand to move into the house immediately while the legal proceedings were ongoing. According to her attorney's letter, she claimed that allowing me to remain in the property during the estate contest created an unfair advantage and potential for evidence tampering. She was requesting immediate occupancy rights to protect her interests and ensure that the property was maintained appropriately during the litigation process. The legal document included a proposed timeline that would require me to vacate the master bedroom and convert the house into a shared living arrangement within 30 days. Margaret would have equal access to all common areas, joint responsibility for household decisions, and the right to monitor my activities to ensure I was not disposing of assets or destroying evidence that might be relevant to her case. The arrangement was presented as temporary and reasonable, but reading between the lines revealed a strategy designed to make my life so uncomfortable that I would eventually agree to settle rather than endure months or years of forced cohabitation with someone who clearly despised me. The proposed living arrangement also included financial provisions that would require me to cover all household expenses during the legal proceedings, since Margaret claimed she could not afford to maintain her current residence while also contributing to the upkeep of the disputed property. This meant I would be paying for utilities, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance while sharing the space with someone who was actively trying to take it away from me. The arrangement was designed to be as humiliating and financially burdensome as possible. As I read through the legal documents for the third time, trying to process the magnitude of what was being demanded of me, I began to understand that this was not simply a family dispute over inheritance. This was a calculated attack designed to destroy my emotional well-being, drain my financial resources, and force me into a settlement that would reward Margaret for her aggression while punishing me for my close relationship with my grandmother. The letter also included ominous references to additional legal actions that might be necessary if I did not respond cooperatively to the initial demand. Margaret's attorney mentioned the possibility of civil lawsuits for financial elder abuse, criminal referrals for theft and fraud, and media coverage that would expose my alleged exploitation of a vulnerable senior citizen. These threats were clearly designed to intimidate me into compliance rather than fighting for my rights through the legal system. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect of Margaret's legal challenge was her sudden claim to have been a devoted daughter-in-law who had maintained a loving relationship with my grandmother throughout the year. The legal documents painted a picture of a woman who had been unfairly excluded from her rightful inheritance by a manipulative granddaughter who had poisoned an elderly woman's mind against her son's family. This narrative was so completely opposite to reality that it felt like reading fiction rather than legal proceeding. The truth was that Margaret had barely tolerated my grandmother during my marriage to her son David, treating family gatherings as obligations to be endured rather than opportunities for genuine connection. She had frequently made disparaging comments about my grandmother's old-fashioned values, her modest lifestyle, and her tendency to save money rather than spend it on luxury items. Margaret had never hidden her belief that my grandmother was holding on to assets that could be better utilized by younger family members who understood modern investment strategies and lifestyle choices. During David's illness and eventual death from leukemia 3 years earlier, Margaret had been notably absent from the hospital visits, care coordination, and emotional support that my grandmother and I had provided. She had appeared for the funeral and wake, but her primary concerns seemed to be related to David's modest life insurance policy and retirement account rather than grief or family support. I had attributed her behavior to her own way of processing loss, but now I was beginning to understand that her absence during difficult times might have been part of a pattern of calculating self-interest rather than genuine emotional overwhelm. As I sat in my grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by the antique furniture and family photographs that were now supposedly subject to legal dispute, I felt a mixture of grief, anger, and determination that surprised me with its intensity. The grief was for my grandmother, who had trusted me to preserve her legacy and protect the family assets she had accumulated through decades of careful saving and wise financial decisions. The anger was directed at Margaret, who was attempting to profit from death and exploit legal systems designed to protect legitimate inheritance rights. But the determination was perhaps the most powerful emotion, a growing resolve to fight back against this attack and expose the truth about Margaret's motivations and character. I realized that this legal challenge was more than a dispute over money and property. It was a battle for the memory and dignity of my grandmother, whose final wishes were being challenged by someone who had never demonstrated genuine care or affection for her. It was also a test of my own character and resilience, a moment when I would need to decide whether to surrender to intimidation or stand up for what was right regardless of the personal cost. The letter concluded with a demand for my written response within 10 business days, and a warning that failure to engage cooperatively with the legal process would be interpreted as evidence of guilt and bad faith. Margaret's attorney had scheduled a preliminary meeting for the following week to discuss the proposed living arrangements and begin the discovery process for the estate contest. I was expected to bring financial records, correspondence with my grandmother, and any other documentation that might be relevant to the case. As I folded the legal documents and placed them back in their envelope, I understood that my life was about to change dramatically. The quiet months of grieving and estate administration were over, replaced by what would likely be a prolonged legal battle that would test my emotional strength, financial resources, and faith in justice. But I also felt something unexpected stirring within me, a sense of purpose and clarity that had been missing since my grandmother's death. Margaret Thornton had made a serious miscalculation in her assessment of my character and capability. She saw a grieving widow living alone in an old house, someone who could be intimidated into surrender through legal threats and forced cohabitation. What she failed to recognize was that my grandmother had taught me more than just the value of hard work and careful financial planning. She had also instilled in me a fierce determination to protect family values and stand up to bullies regardless of their resources or social position. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The woman who had quietly endured Margaret's subtle hostility during family gatherings and politely tolerated her dismissive comments about traditional values was about to transform into someone far more formidable. The legal challenge that was designed to destroy my confidence and force my surrender would instead become the catalyst for discoveries that would expose Margaret's true character and ultimately lead to consequences she had never imagined possible. As I reached for my phone to call the attorney my grandmother had recommended months earlier, I felt the first stirrings of what would become an unshakable resolve to fight for justice. Margaret wanted a battle over inheritance rights, but what she was going to get was a comprehensive investigation into her own financial history and a legal education about the consequences of elder abuse and inheritance fraud. The certified letter had been intended as the opening shot in a campaign designed to intimidate me into submission. Instead, it would prove to be the moment when an ordinary woman discovered extraordinary reserves of courage and determination that would ultimately transform a personal attack into a victory for justice and family value. The woman Margaret Thornton chose to target was not the vulnerable widow she believed she was manipulating. Caroline Elizabeth Hayes possessed a combination of professional skills, personal experiences, and inner strength that would prove devastating to anyone foolish enough to underestimate her capability. At 34 years old, Caroline had survived challenges that would have broken weaker individuals, and each trial had forged character traits that would serve her well in the battle ahead. Caroline's professional background as a graphic designer might have seemed irrelevant to legal warfare, but her work had developed skills that would prove invaluable in the coming months. She specialized in forensic document analysis for law firms and insurance companies, examining contested wills, forged signatures, and manipulated financial records. Her trained eye could detect alterations in typography, identify inconsistencies in paper stock and ink composition, and recognize the subtle signs of digital manipulation that escaped casual observation. What Margaret dismissed as artistic dabbling was actually specialized expertise that generated six-figure annual income from clients who valued precision and attention to detail. Her educational foundation was equally impressive, though she rarely discussed her academic achievements in social settings. Caroline held a Master of Fine Arts degree from Portland State University with a concentration in digital forensics and document authentication. Her thesis research had focused on developing techniques for detecting fraudulent modifications in legal documents, work that had attracted attention from federal investigators and resulted in consulting opportunities with major law enforcement agencies. The quiet woman who attended family gatherings and listened politely to conversations possessed technical knowledge that rivaled experts who testified in federal court cases. But Caroline's most significant asset was her relationship with her grandmother, Rose Margaret O'Brien, who had been far more than a typical family elder. Rose had spent 40 years working as a paralegal for Morrison & Associates, one of Portland's most respected estate planning firms. She had assisted with thousands of wills, trusts, and inheritance disputes, developing encyclopedic knowledge of probate law and inheritance fraud schemes. During their evening conversations over the past decade, Rose had shared stories about manipulative family members, contested estates, and the legal strategies used to protect legitimate heirs from predatory relatives. These conversations had been more than casual family storytelling. Rose had been systematically educating Caroline about the realities of inheritance law, preparing her granddaughter to recognize and respond to the kind of challenges that frequently arose after deaths in families with significant assets. Rose had experienced decades of observing how grief and greed could transform ordinary people into calculating adversaries, and she was determined to ensure Caroline would be prepared for such possibility. Rose had also shared specific warnings about Margaret Thornton, whose behavior during family gatherings had raised concerns that extended beyond mere personality conflict. Rose's professional experience had taught her to recognize the signs of individuals who viewed elderly family members as financial opportunities rather than beloved relatives. Margaret's tendency to steer conversations toward financial topics, her obvious calculations about property values and investment returns, and her barely concealed impatience with family traditions, had triggered alarms that Rose shared privately with Caroline. During the final months of her illness, Rose had made several mysterious phone calls to her former colleagues at Morrison & Associates, conversations that she described as routine check-ins, but which lasted for hours and involved detailed discussions that Caroline could hear from adjacent rooms. Rose had also insisted on updating her will multiple times, each revision more comprehensive and specific than the previous version. At the time, Caroline had attributed this behavior to anxiety about ensuring her final wishes were clearly documented, but she was beginning to understand that Rose had been building legal fortifications against anticipated challenge. Caroline's personal history had also prepared her for confrontation in ways that Margaret could not have anticipated. Her marriage to David Thornton had been marked by constant tension with his mother, who had never accepted Caroline as suitable for her son. Margaret had subjected Caroline to years of subtle psychological warfare, including passive-aggressive comments about her appearance, her career choices, her family background, and her inability to provide grandchildren quickly enough to meet Margaret's expectations. But these attacks had backfired in ways Margaret never recognized. Instead of undermining Caroline's confidence, the constant criticism had taught her to document patterns of manipulative behavior, to remain calm under psychological pressure, and to develop strategies for protecting herself from emotional manipulation. Caroline had learned to recognize Margaret's tactics, predict her behavior patterns, and maintain her emotional equilibrium despite persistent provocation. David's 3-year battle with leukemia had revealed even more about Margaret's character while strengthening Caroline's resolve and resourcefulness. While Caroline had coordinated medical care, managed insurance claims, and provided emotional support during David's illness, Margaret had focused primarily on financial implications and inheritance plans. She had pressured David to update his will multiple times, suggested that Caroline's caregiving efforts were motivated by financial considerations, and even implied that Caroline might be prolonging David's suffering to maximize insurance payout. These accusations had been particularly cruel because Caroline had sacrificed her career advancement and financial security to care for David throughout his illness. She had turned down lucrative contracts, postponed professional development opportunities, and depleted her savings to ensure David received the best possible care, regardless of insurance coverage limitations. Margaret's suggestions that these sacrifices were calculated rather than loving had revealed a mindset so alien to Caroline's values that she began to understand she was dealing with someone whose moral compass operated on completely different principles. The experience of watching David die while managing Margaret's accusations and manipulations had taught Caroline crucial lessons about maintaining focus under extreme stress, protecting important information from hostile family members, and building support networks with medical professionals and legal advisors who could provide objective perspectives on complex family dynamics. She had also learned to document everything, a habit that would prove invaluable in the current situation. Following David's death, Caroline had demonstrated remarkable resilience in rebuilding her life and career. She had expanded her forensic document analysis business, developed new technical skills in digital investigation, and established professional relationships with attorneys who specialized in complex inheritance disputes. Her client base had grown to include major insurance companies, federal agencies, and law firms handling high-profile cases involving document fraud and financial crime. But perhaps most importantly, Caroline had spent the past 3 years developing a comprehensive understanding of Margaret's financial situation, social connections, and behavioral patterns. Her professional work had taught her to research individuals thoroughly before engaging in any business relationship, and she had applied these skills to monitoring Margaret's activities out of concern for David's estate and her own financial security. This research had revealed troubling patterns that extended far beyond typical family tensions. Margaret had been involved in multiple estate disputes with other relatives, had a history of financial problems that seemed inconsistent with her lifestyle and spending pattern, and maintained relationships with individuals who specialized in elder care services and estate planning in ways that suggested more than casual interest in these fields. Caroline had also discovered that Margaret had been asking detailed questions about Rose's financial situation, medical condition, and estate planning decisions during her infrequent visits. These inquiries had been presented as normal family concern, but Caroline's professional experience had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine care and information gathering for strategic purposes. Margaret's questions had been too specific, too focused on financial details, and too persistent to represent casual interest in family welfare. The combination of Caroline's professional expertise, educational background, personal experiences with Margaret's manipulative behavior, and systematic research into her adversary's history, had created a foundation of knowledge and capability that Margaret had completely failed to recognize. The grieving widow living alone in an old house was actually a highly skilled investigator with extensive legal knowledge, professional connections in law enforcement and the legal community, and detailed intelligence about her opponent's vulnerability. Caroline's emotional preparation was equally significant. 3 years of grieving David's death and processing the trauma of his illness had taught her to manage intense emotions while maintaining clear thinking and strategic focus. She had learned to separate her emotional responses from her analytical processes, ensuring that anger and grief would motivate rather than cloud her judgment during the coming battle. Her relationship with Rose had also provided emotional resources that would sustain her through the challenges ahead. Rose's confidence in Caroline's character and capabilities had been expressed not only through her inheritance decisions, but also through countless conversations about strength, resilience, and the importance of fighting for principles even when the odds seemed overwhelming. Rose had shared stories about ordinary people who had achieved extraordinary victories through persistence, preparation, and moral clarity, lessons that had been preparing Caroline for exactly this type of confrontation. The financial resources available to Caroline were also more substantial than Margaret realized. Her forensic document analysis business generated significant income, and her client relationships provided access to legal and investigative resources that would be crucial in the coming months. She had also inherited not only Rose's property and investments, but also her grandmother's extensive network of professional contacts in the legal and financial community. Perhaps most importantly, Caroline possessed something that Margaret completely lacked: genuine righteous anger motivated by love and loyalty rather than greed and entitlement. Her determination to protect Rose's memory and honor her grandmother's final wishes provided an emotional foundation that would sustain her through whatever challenges lay ahead. This was not simply a legal dispute over money and property, but a battle to defend the dignity of someone she had loved deeply against someone who sought to profit from death and manipulate legal systems for personal gain. As Caroline prepared to respond to Margaret's legal challenge, she was not the frightened and isolated widow that Margaret expected to intimidate into submission. She was a skilled professional with specialized knowledge, extensive resources, and unshakable determination to expose the truth about her adversary's character and motivation. The legal battle that Margaret had initiated as a calculated attack on a vulnerable target was about to become a comprehensive investigation that would reveal decades of predatory behavior and ultimately result in consequences that extended far beyond inheritance dispute. The woman Margaret had chosen to attack possessed every skill, resource, and character trait necessary to transform a defensive legal action into an offensive campaign for justice. Caroline's professional expertise would enable her to analyze evidence and build compelling cases. Her educational background would provide the technical knowledge necessary to challenge fraudulent claims. her personal experiences would guide her strategic decisions, and her emotional commitment to Rose's memory would fuel her determination to see justice served regardless of the personal cost. Margaret Thornton had made the fatal error of underestimating an opponent who was not only capable of defending herself but also uniquely qualified to expose the predatory behavior that had motivated the attack in the first place. The inheritance battle that was intended to intimidate Caroline into surrendering her rightful legacy would instead become the catalyst for revelations that would protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation and ensure that Margaret faced appropriate consequences for her decades of manipulative and potentially criminal behavior. The path that led Caroline Elizabeth Hayes to this confrontation with Margaret Thornton began 28 years earlier in the same Victorian house where she now faced legal challenges to her inheritance. Caroline's childhood summers spent with her grandmother Rose had established foundations of character, knowledge, and determination that would prove essential in the battle ahead. What appeared to be simple family visits had actually been systematic preparation for exactly the kind of challenges that Caroline now faced. Rose Margaret O'Brien had recognized exceptional potential in her granddaughter from an early age. While other grandparents focused on entertainment and indulgence during family visits, Rose had chosen to invest in Caroline's intellectual development and moral education. Their summer afternoons were spent not only in traditional grandmother activities, but also in informal lessons about law, justice, and the importance of standing up to those who sought to exploit others through manipulation and intimidation. Rose's professional experience as a paralegal at Morrison & Associates had provided her with extensive knowledge about family dynamics during inheritance disputes. She had witnessed countless situations where grief and greed transformed loving relatives into adversaries, where manipulative individuals exploited legal systems to steal from vulnerable family members, and where ordinary people were forced to defend their rights against those with superior resources and fewer ethical constraints. These experiences had convinced Rose that knowledge and preparation were the most effective defenses against such attacks. Beginning when Caroline was 8 years old, Rose had introduced her granddaughter to the fundamentals of legal thinking and document analysis. These lessons were presented as games and puzzles rather than formal education, but they provided Caroline with skills that would prove invaluable decades later. Rose would show Caroline different versions of the same document and challenge her to identify discrepancies, inconsistencies, and potential signs of alteration or fraud. These exercises developed Caroline's attention to detail and her ability to recognize patterns that others might miss. As Caroline grew older, Rose began sharing more sophisticated lessons about human nature and the psychology of manipulation. She explained how certain individuals used emotional pressure, false guilt, and intimidation tactics to control others and achieve their objective. Rose provided specific examples from her professional experience, describing cases where manipulative family members had successfully stolen inheritances through systematic campaigns of psychological warfare against their target. These conversations were not intended to make Caroline cynical or suspicious of others, but rather to ensure that she would recognize dangerous behavior patterns and respond appropriately when confronted with such tactics. Rose emphasized the importance of maintaining detailed records, seeking professional advice when facing complex challenges, and never allowing intimidation to prevent appropriate defensive action. She taught Caroline that knowledge and preparation were moral obligations for those who possessed the capability to defend themselves and protect others. Rose had also recognized Caroline's artistic talents and encouraged her to pursue formal education in graphic design. But she had guided Caroline towards specializations that would provide practical skills for analyzing and authenticating documents. When Caroline expressed interest in digital art and computer graphics, Rose had suggested focusing on forensic applications that would combine artistic sensibility with technical precision. This guidance had led Caroline to develop expertise that would prove crucial in her professional career and personal circumstances. The decision to pursue graduate studies in digital forensics and document authentication had been influenced by Rose's stories about the increasing sophistication of fraud schemes and the growing demand for experts who could detect and prove document manipulation. Rose had maintained professional relationships with attorneys and investigators who specialized in such cases, and she had arranged internships and learning opportunities that provided Caroline with practical experience in real legal investigation. Caroline's marriage to David Thornton had initially seemed to represent a departure from Rose's careful planning, but it had actually provided essential education about Margaret's character and methods. Rose had encouraged Caroline to maintain detailed records of her interactions with Margaret, not out of paranoia but as a practical exercise in pattern recognition. Over the 7 years of Caroline's marriage, these records had revealed consistent patterns of manipulative behavior that would prove invaluable in understanding Margaret's current legal strategy. During David's illness, Rose had provided both emotional support and practical guidance that helped Caroline navigate the complex challenges of medical care coordination, insurance management, and family dynamics under extreme stress. Rose had also used this period to educate Caroline about the legal and financial implications of serious illness, including the importance of proper documentation, the risks of undue influence allegation, and the strategies that manipulative individuals often employed during times of family vulnerability. Rose's own health decline had provided additional opportunities for Caroline to develop skills and knowledge that would prove essential in their current situation. As Rose's primary caregiver during the final months of her life, Caroline had gained first-hand experience with medical documentation, estate planning processes, and the legal requirements for proving mental competency in inheritance cases. Rose had ensured that every aspect of her care and estate planning was thoroughly documented and properly witnessed to prevent any future challenges to her decision. The conversations between Rose and Caroline during those final months had been particularly significant in preparing for the current confrontation. Rose had shared detailed information about Margaret's financial history, her patterns of behavior during previous family crises, and her apparent interest in Rose's estate planning decision. Rose had also explained the legal strategies that individuals like Margaret typically employed in inheritance disputes, and the defensive measures that could be used to counter such attacks. Rose had been particularly concerned about Margaret's apparent surveillance of her financial situation and medical condition. During Margaret's infrequent visits, she had asked detailed questions about Rose's investments, property values, and estate planning decisions that seemed inappropriate for casual family interaction. Rose had also noticed that Margaret showed unusual interest in Rose's medical appointments, medication schedules, and cognitive function, as if she were gathering information for future use rather than expressing genuine concern about family wealth. These observations had led Rose to take extraordinary precautions in her estate planning and medical care documentation. She had ensured that multiple independent witnesses were present for all important legal documents, that her mental competency was formally evaluated and documented by qualified professionals, and that detailed records were maintained of all medical decisions and financial transactions. Rose had also arranged for audio and video recordings of key conversations and legal proceedings to prevent any future disputes about her mental state or the circumstances surrounding her final decision. The education that Caroline had received from Rose extended beyond legal and technical knowledge to include lessons about personal resilience and emotional strength under pressure. Rose had shared stories about ordinary people who had overcome extraordinary challenges through persistence, courage, and moral clarity. She had emphasized the importance of maintaining focus on long-term objectives rather than becoming distracted by short-term emotional responses to provocation and intimidation. Rose had also taught Caroline about the importance of building and maintaining professional relationships that could provide support during difficult times. Through Rose's connections in the legal community, Caroline had established relationships with attorneys, investigators, and other professionals who specialized in inheritance disputes and elder abuse cases. These relationships provided Caroline with access to expertise and resources that would be crucial in her confrontation with Margaret. The financial foundation that Rose had established for Caroline was also the result of careful long-term planning rather than simple inheritance. Rose had spent decades accumulating assets, not only for her own security, but also to ensure that Caroline would have the resources necessary to defend her inheritance against potential challenges. Rose had structured her investments in property holdings to maximize Caroline's financial flexibility while minimizing opportunities for successful legal attacks. Perhaps most importantly, Rose had instilled in Caroline a deep understanding of the moral and ethical principles that should guide decisions during inheritance disputes. Rose had emphasized that the ultimate objective was not simply to preserve financial assets, but to honor the memory and wishes of deceased family members, while protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and abuse. This moral framework provided Caroline with clarity about her obligations and objectives that would sustain her through the emotional challenges of prolonged legal confrontation. The professional skills that Caroline had developed through her forensic document analysis career had been directly influenced by Rose's guidance and support. Rose had encouraged Caroline to pursue consulting opportunities with law enforcement agencies and major law firms to gain experience with complex investigations and high-stakes legal proceedings. This work had provided Caroline with practical knowledge about evidence collection, case preparation, and expert testimony that would prove invaluable in her personal legal battle. Caroline's understanding of Margaret's character and behavior patterns had also been shaped by Rose's systematic analysis of family dynamics over many years. Rose had taught Caroline to observe Margaret's interactions with other family members, her responses to various situations, and her apparent motivations and objectives. This analysis had revealed consistent patterns of self-interest, manipulation, and calculation that helped Caroline understand the true nature of Margaret's current legal challenge. The relationship between Caroline and Rose had been built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values that emphasized integrity, justice, and protection of family welfare. This relationship had provided Caroline with emotional strength and moral clarity that would be essential during the difficult months ahead. Rose's confidence in Caroline's character and capabilities had been expressed not only through her inheritance decisions, but also through her systematic preparation of Caroline for exactly the challenges that Margaret was now presenting. As Caroline prepared to respond to Margaret's legal challenge, she possessed advantages that extended far beyond financial resources or professional expertise. She had been systematically prepared for this confrontation through decades of education, experience, and relationship building that had equipped her with every tool necessary for success. The foundation that Rose had established would enable Caroline not only to defend her inheritance, but also expose the predatory behavior that had motivated Margaret's attack and ensure that appropriate consequences followed from Margaret's calculated exploitation of legal systems designed to protect legitimate inheritance rights. The journey that had brought Caroline to this moment represented the culmination of careful preparation, systematic education, character development that had been guided by someone who understood the realities of inheritance disputes and the importance of ensuring that justice prevailed over manipulation and greed. Caroline was not facing this challenge as an isolated individual, but as the beneficiary of decades of wisdom, planning, and preparation that had positioned her for victory against an opponent who had seriously underestimated both Caroline's capabilities and the thoroughness of Rose's preparations for exactly this type of confrontation. The first indication that Margaret Thornton was orchestrating something more sophisticated than a simple inheritance dispute had emerged 3 months before her formal legal challenge arrived. Caroline had initially dismissed these early warning signs as coincidental events, but her professional training in pattern recognition and her grandmother's lessons about predatory behavior gradually revealed a systematic campaign that had been developing for far longer than she had realized. The initial red flag appeared during what Margaret had described as a routine visit to check on Caroline's welfare following Rose's death. Margaret had arrived unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon in July, claiming that she had been in the neighborhood visiting friends and thought it would be appropriate to see how Caroline was managing her grief and the responsibilities of estate administration. The visit had seemed genuinely thoughtful at first, with Margaret expressing appropriate condolences and offering assistance with practical matters related to settling Rose's affair. However, Margaret's behavior during that visit had included subtle elements that triggered Caroline's professional instincts about document security and information gathering. Margaret had shown unusual interest in the contents of Rose's home office, asking detailed questions about filing systems, document storage, and the location of important papers. She had also inquired about Caroline's timeline for sorting through Rose's possessions, her plans for property maintenance, and her intentions regarding the long-term disposition of the estate. These questions had been presented as normal expressions of family concern, but Caroline's experience with forensic investigations had taught her to recognize the difference between genuine interest and systematic information gathering. Margaret's inquiries had been too specific, too focused on legal and financial details, and too persistent to represent casual concern about family welfare. The questions had also revealed knowledge about estate administration processes that seemed inconsistent with Margaret's claimed unfamiliarity with such matters. During that same visit, Margaret had made several comments about the apparent value of Rose's possessions and property, noting the quality of antique furniture, the potential market value of collectibles, and the advantageous location of the house in Riverside Falls Historic District. She had also mentioned her surprise at the extent of Rose's accumulated wealth, suggesting that she had not previously understood the full scope of Rose's financial success through careful saving and wise investment decisions over several decades. Most significantly, Margaret had asked to use Rose's computer to check her email, claiming that her phone battery had died and she needed to confirm an appointment. Caroline had politely declined this request, explaining that she had not yet sorted through Rose's digital files and preferred to maintain the computer's security until the estate administration was complete. Margaret's reaction to this refusal had been more intense than the situation warranted, suggesting that computer access had been more important to her visit than she had initially indicated. The second warning sign had occurred 2 weeks later when Caroline discovered that someone had attempted to access Rose's online banking accounts using incorrect passwords. The bank's security department had contacted Caroline about multiple failed login attempts from an IP address that traced back to Margaret's home internet connection. When Caroline had confronted Margaret about these attempts, Margaret had claimed that Rose had previously given her account information for emergency purposes, and she had been trying to help Caroline monitor for unauthorized transactions. This explanation had been problematic for several reasons that Caroline's professional experience immediately recognized. Rose had been exceptionally careful about financial security and would never have shared banking credentials with anyone, including family members. The failed login attempts had also occurred during times when Margaret would have known Caroline was away from the house, suggesting deliberate timing to avoid discovery. Most importantly, Margaret's claimed concern about unauthorized transactions was contradicted by her failure to contact Caroline directly about her security concerns, rather than attempting independent access to protected accounts. Caroline's subsequent investigation into these login attempts had revealed additional disturbing information about Margaret's recent activities. The same IP address had been used to research estate planning attorneys, inheritance law procedures, and strategies for contesting wills in Oregon. Margaret had also conducted extensive online searches about Caroline's professional background, her financial situation, and her legal vulnerabilities as a beneficiary of a substantial inheritance. These searches had included specific queries about undue influence allegations, mental competency challenges, and the evidence requirements for successful estate contact. The third significant warning sign had emerged when Caroline received an unexpected visit from Patricia Williamson, a social worker from Riverside County's Adult Protective Services Division. Patricia explained that her office had received an anonymous report expressing concern about possible elder abuse in Rose's final months, specifically allegations that Rose's caregiver had isolated her from family members and potentially influenced her estate planning decisions through manipulation and coercion. The timing of this report had been particularly suspicious because it had been filed just 3 days after Rose's death, suggesting that the complainant had been monitoring the situation and waiting for Rose's passing to initiate the investigation. The specific allegations in the report had also demonstrated detailed knowledge about Rose's medical condition, her estate planning activities, and Caroline's role as her primary caregiver, indicating that the complainant had access to information that would not have been available to casual observers. Patricia's investigation had quickly determined that the allegations were unfounded and potentially malicious. The extensive documentation that Rose and Caroline had maintained about Rose's medical care, estate planning processes, and family interactions had provided clear evidence that Rose had remained mentally competent throughout her illness and had made all decisions freely without coercion or undue influence. Multiple witnesses, including medical professionals, legal advisors, and family friends, had confirmed that Caroline's caregiving had been exemplary and that Rose's estate planning decisions had been consistent with her long-standing values and wishes. However, the investigation had revealed that the anonymous report had included specific details about Rose's financial accounts, property holdings, and estate planning timeline that would not have been accessible to most family members. The complainant had demonstrated knowledge about private legal consultations, confidential medical information, and personal conversations that suggested either direct access to protected information or systematic surveillance of Rose's activities during her final month. Caroline's professional experience with document analysis had enabled her to recognize patterns in the anonymous report that suggested authorship by someone with legal knowledge and experience in elder abuse allegations. The language used in the report had included specific legal terminology and references to statutory requirements that indicated familiarity with adult protective services, procedures, and evidence standards. The report had also been structured in a way that maximized the likelihood of triggering a formal investigation while minimizing the risk of immediate dismissal. The fourth warning sign had occurred when Caroline discovered that Margaret had been contacting Rose's former colleagues at Morrison & Associates, ostensibly to share condolences and reminisce about Rose's professional contribution. However, these conversations had included detailed questions about Rose's mental state during her final months, her estate planning activities, and her relationship with Caroline during the period when she was serving as Rose's primary caregiver. Margaret's inquiries had been presented as expressions of family concern and genuine interest in Rose's professional legacy, but the specific nature of her questions had raised concerns among Rose's former colleagues. Several attorneys at the firm had contacted Caroline to report these conversations, because Margaret's questions had seemed designed to elicit information that could be used to challenge Rose's mental competency or Caroline's fitness as a beneficiary. These contacts had also revealed that Margaret had been researching the backgrounds and specialties of various attorneys at Morrison & Associates, apparently seeking to identify individuals who might be willing to provide information or professional services related to estate contests and inheritance disputes. Margaret had specifically inquired about attorneys who specialized in undue influence cases and mental competency challenges, suggesting that her interest in Rose's estate planning decisions extended beyond casual family concern. The fifth significant warning sign had emerged when Caroline received a series of phone calls from individuals claiming to represent various service providers who had allegedly worked with Rose during her final month. These callers had requested permission to complete final billing procedures, retrieve equipment that had supposedly been left at Rose's house, and verify services that had been provided during Rose's illness. Caroline's careful investigation of these requests had revealed that none of these service providers had actually worked with Rose, and several of the phone numbers had traced back to Margaret's business associates and personal contacts. The calls appeared to be attempts to gain access to Rose's house, verify information about her estate and medical condition, and potentially plant listening devices or other surveillance equipment that could provide intelligence about Caroline's activities and estate administration procedures. The sophistication of these deception attempts had demonstrated that Margaret was receiving assistance from individuals with experience in surveillance, fraud, and potentially criminal investigation technique. The coordination required to execute multiple false service provider contacts suggested planning and resources that extended beyond what Margaret could have managed independently. Caroline's recognition of these warning signs had been facilitated by her professional training in forensic investigation and her grandmother's systematic education about predatory behavior patterns. Each individual incident might have been dismissed as coincidental or explained through innocent interpretations, but the cumulative pattern had revealed a coordinated campaign designed to gather intelligence, establish grounds for legal challenge, and position Margaret for a comprehensive attack on Caroline's inheritance right. The timing and coordination of these activities had also demonstrated that Margaret's planning had begun well before Rose's death, possibly extending back several years to the period when David was battling leukemia and family dynamics were complicated by medical stress and financial pressure. Margaret had apparently been systematically gathering information and building relationships that would be useful in challenging Caroline's inheritance, while presenting herself as a caring family member concerned about elder welfare. Most importantly, the sophisticated nature of these preliminary activities had indicated that Margaret possessed resources, knowledge, and professional assistance that extended far beyond what would be typical for ordinary inheritance disputes. The legal terminology in the anonymous report, the technical sophistication of the computer access attempts, and the coordination of the false service provider contacts had suggested that Margaret was working with individuals who possessed specialized knowledge about elder abuse investigations, estate law, and possibly criminal investigation techniques. Caroline's growing awareness of the scope and sophistication of Margaret's campaign had transformed her understanding of the challenge she was facing. This was not simply a family dispute motivated by grief and financial stress, but rather a calculated attack orchestrated by someone who possessed significant resources and professional assistance. Margaret had been systematically preparing for this confrontation while Caroline had been focused on grieving Rose's loss and managing estate administration responsibility. However, Caroline's recognition of these warning signs had also provided valuable intelligence about Margaret's methods, resources, and likely future strategy. The pattern of activities revealed Margaret's priorities, her sources of information, and her apparent confidence in her ability to challenge Caroline's inheritance successfully. This intelligence would prove crucial in developing defensive strategies and counterattacks that could neutralize Margaret's advantages while exposing her predatory behavior to appropriate authority. The realization that she was facing a sophisticated adversary with significant resources had initially been intimidating, but Caroline's professional experience and personal preparation had gradually transformed her fear into determination and strategic focus. The same skills that had enabled her to recognize Margaret's warning signs would also enable her to develop effective responses and ultimately turn Margaret's calculated attack into an opportunity for justice and accountability. The decision to transform from defensive victim to proactive advocate for justice crystallized for Caroline during a sleepless night in late October, 3 weeks after receiving Margaret's legal challenge. The moral framework that would guide her actions through the coming months was not born from anger or revenge, but from a profound understanding of the broader implications of Margaret's predatory behavior and the recognition that failing to act would enable continued exploitation of vulnerable elderly individuals throughout the community. Caroline's ethical foundation had been shaped by decades of conversations with Rose about the responsibilities that accompany knowledge and capability. Rose had frequently emphasized that those who possess the skills to recognize and combat injustice have moral obligations that extend beyond personal self-interest. These conversations had been grounded in Rose's professional experience, witnessing the devastating consequences when manipulative individuals successfully exploited legal systems designed to protect legitimate inheritance rights and vulnerable family members. The realization that Margaret's attack represented more than personal greed had emerged through Caroline's systematic analysis of the evidence she had gathered about Margaret's activities and background. Her investigation had revealed that Margaret had been involved in similar disputes with other elderly relatives, suggesting a pattern of predatory behavior that extended far beyond the current inheritance challenge. The sophistication of Margaret's methods and the resources she had deployed indicated that this was not an isolated incident driven by desperate financial circumstances, but rather a calculated strategy that had been successfully employed in previous situations. Caroline's professional work in forensic document analysis had provided her with access to law enforcement databases and investigative resources that revealed the true scope of Margaret's activity. Her research had uncovered evidence that Margaret had been systematically targeting elderly individuals with substantial estates, developing relationships with potential targets through charitable organizations and social groups, and then positioning herself to influence estate planning decisions or challenge existing wills through various legal mechanisms. The pattern of Margaret's behavior had become clear through Caroline's analysis of public records, court filings, and professional networking within the legal community. Margaret had been involved in at least 4 previous inheritance disputes over the past 15 years,
each following similar patterns of late-stage involvement in elderly relatives' lives, claims of special relationships that justified inheritance rights, and allegations of undue influence against primary beneficiaries. In each case, Margaret had ultimately received substantial settlements or court awards that rewarded her aggressive tactics while penalizing family members who had provided genuine care and support to elderly relatives. The psychological profile that emerged from Caroline's investigation revealed an individual who had transformed elder care and family relationships into profit-generating enterprise. Margaret had developed sophisticated methods for identifying vulnerable elderly individuals, establishing credibility with potential targets, and manipulating legal systems to her advantage. The resources and professional assistance that Margaret had deployed in her current challenge against Caroline indicated that her previous successes had provided both the financial means and the strategic knowledge necessary to escalate her activities to increasingly sophisticated levels. Caroline's growing understanding of Margaret's pattern of behavior had also revealed the broader social implications of failing to respond effectively to such predatory activity. Each successful inheritance challenge by individuals like Margaret established legal precedents that made future attacks more likely to succeed. The systematic exploitation of elderly individuals and their families created an environment where genuine caregiving relationships became liabilities rather than expressions of love and responsibility. The financial rewards that Margaret had received through her previous legal challenges had enabled her to expand her operations and target additional vulnerable individuals. The moral imperative that drove Caroline's decision to fight back was rooted in her recognition that Margaret's success would inevitably lead to additional victims. The sophisticated methods that Margaret had developed could be replicated by other predatory individuals, creating a model for systematic exploitation that would undermine the security and dignity of elderly individuals throughout the community. The legal precedents that would be established through Margaret's victory would provide roadmaps for future attacks on legitimate inheritance rights and family relationships. Caroline's ethical framework had been further strengthened by her understanding of Rose's specific vulnerabilities and the calculating nature of Margaret's approach to exploiting those vulnerabilities. Rose's declining health and increasing dependence on Caroline for daily care had created opportunities for Margaret to claim that Caroline had isolated Rose from other family members and manipulated her decision-making processes. Margaret's systematic documentation of Rose's medical condition and estate planning activities had been designed to support allegations that Rose had not been competent to make inheritance decisions during her final months. The cruelty of Margaret's strategy was evident in her willingness to exploit Rose's death and Caroline's grief for financial gain. Margaret had timed her legal challenge to coincide with the period when Caroline would be most emotionally vulnerable and least prepared to mount effective resistance. The allegations that Margaret had made about Caroline's character and motivations were designed to transform Caroline's genuine love and care for Rose into evidence of manipulation and exploitation.
The demand for immediate cohabitation was calculated to maximize psychological pressure while minimizing Caroline's ability to prepare effective legal defenses. Caroline's recognition of the moral dimensions of her situation had been reinforced by her professional understanding of the broader societal costs of elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Her work with law enforcement agencies had provided her with extensive knowledge about the psychological and financial damage that such crimes inflicted on victims and their families. The systematic nature of Margaret's activities represented a form of organized crime that targeted some of society's most vulnerable members, while exploiting legal systems that were designed to protect rather than enable exploitation. The ethical clarity that guided Caroline's decision to fight back was also informed by her understanding of Rose's specific wishes and values. Rose had not simply left Caroline an inheritance, but had entrusted her with the responsibility to preserve family values and protect the legacy of several generations of careful saving and moral behavior. Rose's estate planning decisions had been motivated by her desire to ensure that her accumulated wealth would be used to support education, family stability, and charitable activities that reflected her lifelong commitment to community welfare. Margaret's challenge to Rose's estate planning decisions represented more than an attack on Caroline's financial security. It was an assault on Rose's memory and a betrayal of the trust that Rose had placed in Caroline to honor her values and protect her legacy. The settlement that Margaret was demanding would divert resources away from the charitable activities and family support that Rose had specifically intended to fund through her carefully planned bequests. Caroline's moral obligation to defend Rose's memory and honor her wishes had been reinforced by her understanding of the broader implications for other elderly individuals who might face similar exploitation. The legal precedents that would be established through Caroline's response to Margaret's challenge would influence the outcomes of future inheritance disputes and potentially determine whether predatory individuals, like Margaret, would be encouraged or deterred from continuing their systematic exploitation of vulnerable elderly individuals. The decision to transform from defensive victim to proactive advocate had also been motivated by Caroline's recognition that she possessed unique capabilities and resources that positioned her to expose Margaret's predatory behavior and ensure appropriate accountability. Her professional expertise in forensic document analysis provided her with skills that were directly relevant to investigating and proving inheritance fraud. Her educational background in digital forensics equipped her with technical knowledge that could be used to analyze evidence and build compelling cases against sophisticated adversaries. Caroline's professional network within the legal and law enforcement communities provided her with access to resources and expertise that would be crucial in developing effective strategies for challenging Margaret's activity. Her systematic documentation of Margaret's behavior patterns and her analysis of public records had already provided substantial evidence that could be used to support criminal referrals and civil litigation beyond the immediate inheritance dispute. The moral framework that guided Caroline's strategic planning was grounded in principles of justice and accountability rather than personal revenge or financial motivation. Her objective was not simply to defeat Margaret's legal challenge, but to expose the full scope of Margaret's predatory activities and ensure that appropriate consequences followed from her systematic exploitation of elderly individuals and their family. This broader mission required strategies that would address both the immediate inheritance dispute and the underlying pattern of criminal behavior that had enabled Margaret's attacks on multiple victims. Caroline's understanding of her moral obligations had been strengthened by her recognition that the resources and capabilities that Rose had provided her carried responsibilities that extended beyond personal benefit. The financial security that Caroline had inherited through Rose's estate planning created obligations to use those resources in ways that would honor Rose's memory and protect other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation. The professional skills and knowledge that Caroline had developed through her education and career represented tools that could be used to serve justice and protect community welfare. The ethical principles that would guide Caroline's actions through the coming months were rooted in her commitment to truth, justice, and the protection of vulnerable individuals, rather than personal financial gain or emotional satisfaction. Her decision to fight back against Margaret's challenge was motivated by moral imperatives that transcended personal interests and reflected her understanding of the broader social responsibilities that accompany knowledge, capability, and resources. The transformation from defensive victim to proactive advocate represented Caroline's recognition that the choice between action and inaction was fundamentally a moral decision that would determine not only her personal future, but also the safety and security of other elderly individuals who might face similar exploitation. The courage required to challenge a sophisticated adversary with significant resources was sustained by Caroline's understanding that moral clarity and righteous purpose provided advantages that could overcome even the most formidable opposition. Caroline's commitment to justice was reinforced by her understanding that the legal and ethical principles at stake in her confrontation with Margaret represented fundamental values that supported the stability and integrity of family relationships and community welfare. The outcome of her battle would establish precedents that would influence how society responded to elder abuse and inheritance fraud, potentially determining whether such crimes would be effectively deterred or tacitly encouraged through inadequate enforcement and insufficient consequence. The moral imperative that drove Caroline's decision to fight back was ultimately grounded in her recognition that those who possess the capability to defend justice have obligations that cannot be avoided without betraying the trust and sacrifices of those who provided them with their advantages. Rose's systematic preparation of Caroline for exactly this type of confrontation had created both opportunities and responsibilities that required Caroline to act with courage and determination regardless of personal cost or risk. The development of Caroline's strategic response to Margaret's legal challenge began with a systematic analysis of her opponent's vulnerabilities and the construction of a comprehensive plan that would address both the immediate inheritance dispute and the broader pattern of predatory behavior that her investigation had revealed. The planning process required Caroline to integrate her professional expertise in forensic analysis, her educational background in digital investigation, and her understanding of legal procedures into a coordinated campaign designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. Caroline's strategic framework was built upon her recognition that conventional defensive approaches would be insufficient to address the sophisticated nature of Margaret's attack. Traditional inheritance dispute strategies, typically focused on proving the validity of contested wills and the mental competency of deceased testator. But Caroline's situation required a more comprehensive approach that would expose the systematic nature of Margaret's predatory activities while establishing legal precedents that would protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation. The foundation of Caroline's strategic planning was her analysis of Margaret's previous inheritance disputes and the methods she had employed to achieve successful outcomes in those cases. Caroline's research had revealed that Margaret's success had been based on her ability to exploit procedural weaknesses in estate litigation, manipulate emotional responses of judges and juries, and overwhelm legitimate beneficiaries with legal costs and prolonged uncertainty. These tactics had been effective because Margaret's previous opponents had lacked the resources and expertise necessary to expose her systematic approach to inheritance fraud. Caroline's professional experience in forensic document analysis provided her with unique advantages in developing counter-strategies to Margaret's established method. Her ability to detect and prove document manipulation would be crucial in challenging the evidence that Margaret would present to support her claims of special relationships with elderly relatives and legitimate inheritance rights. Her understanding of digital forensics would enable her to analyze electronic communications and computer records that might reveal the true scope of Margaret's activities and the coordination between Margaret and her professional associate. The strategic planning process began with Caroline's development of a comprehensive timeline that documented Margaret's activities and interactions with Rose over the past 5 years. This timeline revealed patterns of behavior that contradicted Margaret's claims of close family relationships and genuine concern for Rose's welfare. The documentation showed that Margaret's interest in Rose's estate and medical condition had intensified dramatically during the final months of Rose's life, coinciding with Rose's increased vulnerability and dependence on Caroline for daily care. Caroline's analysis of financial records and communication patterns provided additional evidence that Margaret's actions had been motivated by calculated assessment of inheritance opportunities, rather than genuine family concern. The timing of Margaret's visits to Rose, inquiries about Rose's estate planning activities, and her attempts to access Rose's financial information demonstrated a systematic approach to gathering intelligence and positioning herself for eventual legal challenges to Rose's estate planning decision. The strategic planning process also involved Caroline's development of a comprehensive understanding of the legal and regulatory framework that governed inheritance disputes, elder abuse investigations, and professional misconduct cases. Her research revealed multiple avenues for challenging Margaret's activities beyond the immediate inheritance dispute, including potential criminal referrals for elder abuse, civil litigation for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and professional conduct complaints against the attorneys and other professionals who had assisted Margaret in her previous cases. Caroline's strategic framework incorporated her understanding that Margaret's success had been dependent on her ability to control the narrative and timeline of legal proceedings, while overwhelming opponents with procedural complexity and financial pressure. Caroline's response strategy was designed to reverse these advantages by establishing proactive control over the investigation process, presenting evidence in ways that would be compelling to both legal professionals and the general public, and demonstrating the broader implications of Margaret's activities for community welfare and elderly protection. The development of Caroline's evidence collection strategy required careful coordination between her professional capabilities and the legal requirements for establishing admissible proof in various proceedings. Her forensic analysis skills would be applied to examining documents, communications, and financial records that might reveal evidence of fraud, manipulation, or other criminal activity. Her digital investigation capabilities would be used to analyze electronic communications, computer records, and online activities that might provide insights into Margaret's planning and coordination with associates. Caroline's strategic planning also incorporated her understanding of the importance of building public awareness and support for her case, while maintaining the confidentiality and integrity of legal proceedings. Her approach would involve careful coordination with journalist advocacy organizations and community leaders to ensure that the broader implications of Margaret's activities received appropriate attention, while avoiding actions that might compromise her legal objectives or violate procedural requirements. The financial strategy that Caroline developed was designed to ensure that she possessed sufficient resources to sustain prolonged legal proceedings, while also funding the investigative activities that would be necessary to expose the full scope of Margaret's predatory behavior. Her analysis of Margaret's previous cases had revealed that Margaret's success had often been achieved through her ability to outlast opponents financially rather than through superior legal arguments or evidence. Caroline's strategic planning addressed this vulnerability by developing cost-effective approaches to evidence gathering and legal representation that would enable her to maintain financial sustainability throughout extended proceedings. Caroline's strategic framework also incorporated her understanding of the psychological and emotional dimensions of her confrontation with Margaret. Her planning recognized that Margaret would attempt to use intimidation, harassment, and emotional manipulation to undermine Caroline's resolve and effectiveness. Caroline's response strategy included specific provisions for maintaining emotional stability and strategic focus, while protecting herself from the psychological warfare that Margaret had employed successfully in previous cases. The development of Caroline's professional support network was a crucial component of her strategic planning. Her approach involved identifying and recruiting attorneys, investigators, forensic experts, and other professionals who possessed the specialized knowledge and experience necessary to address the complex legal and technical issues involved in her case. This network would provide Caroline with access to resources and expertise that would be essential for challenging Margaret's sophisticated methods and ensuring that appropriate legal and professional consequences resulted from her predatory activity. Caroline's strategic planning also incorporated her understanding of the importance of coordinating her immediate response to Margaret's inheritance challenge with longer-term objectives related to exposing Margaret's systematic exploitation of elderly individuals. Her approach would ensure that evidence gathered for the inheritance dispute would also be useful for criminal referrals, civil litigation, and professional conduct complaints that might follow from her investigation into Margaret's activity. The timeline that Caroline developed for implementing her strategic plan was designed to maximize the effectiveness of her response while maintaining compliance with legal deadlines and procedural requirements. Her approach would involve simultaneous development of defensive strategies for the inheritance dispute and proactive investigations into Margaret's broader pattern of predatory behavior. This coordination would enable Caroline to present a comprehensive case that addressed both the immediate legal challenges and the underlying criminal activity that had motivated Margaret's attack. Caroline's strategic framework incorporated her understanding that success would require not only defeating Margaret's immediate legal challenge, but also establishing precedents and consequences that would deter similar attacks on other vulnerable elderly individuals. Her planning recognized that the broader social implications of her case would require coordination with law enforcement agencies, regulatory bodies, and advocacy organizations that possessed the authority and resources necessary to address systematic elder abuse and inheritance fraud. The communication strategy that Caroline developed was designed to ensure that her message reached appropriate audiences
while maintaining the confidentiality and integrity of legal proceedings. Her approach would involve careful coordination with media outlets, professional organizations, and community groups to build awareness and support for her case, while avoiding actions that might compromise her legal objectives or violate ethical obligations related to ongoing litigation. Caroline's strategic planning also incorporated her understanding of the importance of protecting other potential victims of Margaret's predatory behavior while her case was proceeding. Her approach would involve coordination with adult protective services, law enforcement agency, and community organizations to ensure that appropriate warnings and protective measures were implemented to prevent Margaret from continuing her systematic exploitation of elderly individuals while legal proceedings were ongoing. The implementation strategy that Caroline developed was designed to ensure that her response to Margaret's challenge would be both comprehensive and sustainable throughout what would likely be prolonged legal proceeding. Her approach incorporated specific provisions for maintaining financial resources, professional relationships, and emotional stability while pursuing multiple legal and investigative objectives simultaneously. Caroline's strategic framework ultimately reflected her recognition that the confrontation with Margaret represented an opportunity to address not only the immediate threat to her inheritance, but also the broader pattern of systematic elder abuse that Margaret's activities represent. Her planning process had transformed a defensive response to a legal challenge into a proactive campaign for justice that would establish precedents and consequences designed to protect vulnerable elderly individuals throughout the community. The strategic plan that Caroline developed represented the culmination of her professional expertise, educational background, and personal preparation for exactly this type of confrontation. Her approach would enable her to transform Margaret's calculated attack into an opportunity for comprehensive victory that would address both immediate legal challenges and broader objectives related to justice, accountability, and community protection. The foundation that Rose had provided through decades of systematic preparation had equipped Caroline with every tool necessary to develop and implement strategies that would ensure Margaret's predatory behavior would finally face appropriate consequence. The transformation of Caroline's individual challenge into a coordinated campaign for justice required the systematic development of professional relationships and strategic alliances that would provide the expertise, resource, and credibility necessary to expose Margaret's predatory behavior while achieving comprehensive victory in the inheritance dispute. Caroline's approach to building these alliances demonstrated the fundamental principle that extraordinary achievements require collaboration between individuals who share common values and complementary capability. The foundation of Caroline's alliance-building strategy was her recognition that Margaret's sophisticated methods and extensive resources could not be effectively countered through individual effort alone. Her analysis of Margaret's previous successes had revealed that legitimate beneficiaries had typically been defeated not through superior legal arguments, but through their inability to match Margaret's coordination of professional support, financial resources, and strategic plan. Caroline's response required the development of a network that could provide equivalent capabilities while maintaining the moral clarity and ethical standards that distinguished her objectives from Margaret's predatory activity. Caroline's first strategic alliance was established with Jonathan Mitchell, a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, who had worked closely with Rose throughout her 40-year career as a paralegal. Jonathan's relationship with Rose extended beyond professional collaboration to genuine friendship and mutual respect based on shared values and complementary expertise. His understanding of Rose's character, her estate planning decisions, and her specific concerns about Margaret's behavior provided crucial context for developing effective legal strategies, while ensuring that Caroline's actions honored Rose's memory and intention. Jonathan's expertise in estate litigation and elder law provided Caroline with access to specialized knowledge about the legal procedures and precedents that would govern her case. His experience with inheritance disputes involving allegations of undue influence and mental incompetency equipped him with practical understanding of the evidence requirements and strategic approaches that would be necessary to defeat Margaret's challenge. Most importantly, Jonathan's professional reputation and relationships within the legal community provided Caroline with credibility and access to additional resources that would be essential for her comprehensive campaign. The alliance with Jonathan also provided Caroline with access to the institutional resources of Morrison & Associates, including research capabilities, investigative support, and coordination with other legal professionals who possessed specialized expertise in areas relevant to her case. The firm's established relationships with forensic accountants, medical experts, and other professionals who could provide expert testimony and analysis represented resources that would have been difficult for Caroline to access independently. Caroline's second crucial alliance was developed with Detective Sarah Martinez of the Riverside Falls Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Sarah's professional background in investigating elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and other crimes targeting vulnerable elderly individuals provided Caroline with access to law enforcement resources and expertise that would be essential for addressing the criminal aspects of Margaret's activity. Sarah's understanding of the evidence requirements for criminal prosecutions and her relationships with prosecutors and other law enforcement professionals equipped Caroline with knowledge about the legal mechanisms that could be used to ensure appropriate consequences for Margaret's predatory behavior. The alliance with Detective Martinez also provided Caroline with access to investigative capabilities that exceeded what could be achieved through private resources alone. Sarah's ability to obtain search warrants, subpoena records, and coordinate with other law enforcement agencies represented advantages that would be crucial for uncovering the full scope of Margaret's activities and building comprehensive cases against her and her associates. Sarah's professional obligation to protect vulnerable elderly individuals from exploitation aligned perfectly with Caroline's moral objectives, while providing official authority for actions that might otherwise be constrained by privacy laws and procedural limitations. Caroline's third strategic alliance was established with Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a geriatric psychiatrist who had provided expert testimony in numerous cases involving allegations of mental incompetency and undue influence in inheritance disputes. Thompson's medical expertise and professional experience equipped her with specialized knowledge about the cognitive capabilities of elderly individuals and the factors that could affect their decision-making capacity. Her ability to analyze medical records, interview witnesses, and provide expert opinions about mental competency issues would be essential for defending Rose's estate planning decisions against Margaret's anticipated challenges. The alliance with Dr. Thompson also provided Caroline with access to professional networks within the medical and mental health communities that could provide additional expert testimony and analysis as needed. Thompson's relationships with other geriatric specialists, neurologists, and psychiatrists represented resources that could be mobilized to provide comprehensive evaluation of any medical evidence that Margaret might present to support her claims about Rose's mental state during her final month. Caroline's fourth crucial alliance was developed with Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in investigating financial crimes and analyzing complex financial transactions for evidence of fraud and manipulation. Marcus's expertise in financial analysis and his experience with inheritance disputes provided Caroline with capabilities that would be essential for examining Margaret's financial activities and identifying evidence of systematic fraud or other criminal behavior. His ability to trace financial transactions, analyze investment patterns, and identify hidden assets would be crucial for understanding the full scope of Margaret's predatory activities and their impact on her previous victim. The alliance with Marcus also provided Caroline with access to specialized software and databases that could be used to analyze financial records and identify patterns of suspicious activity that might not be apparent through conventional examination methods. Marcus's professional relationships with other forensic accountants, banking professionals, and financial investigators represented additional resources that could be mobilized to provide comprehensive analysis of complex financial evidence. Caroline's fifth strategic alliance was established with Jennifer Walsh, an investigative journalist who specialized in reporting on elder abuse and consumer protection issues. Jennifer's professional background in investigating and exposing systematic fraud and abuse provided Caroline with access to media resources and public awareness capabilities that would be essential for ensuring that Margaret's predatory activities received appropriate public attention. Jennifer's ability to research public records, inter-abuse sources, and coordinate with other journalists represented investigative capabilities that complemented Caroline's legal and technical resources. The alliance with Jennifer also provided Caroline with access to advocacy organizations and community groups that worked to protect elderly individuals from exploitation and abuse. Jennifer's relationships with these organizations represented opportunities to build broader support for Caroline's case, while ensuring that the lessons learned from her confrontation with Margaret would be used to protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation. Caroline's approach to building these alliances was characterized by transparency, mutual respect, and shared commitment to justice, rather than purely transactional relationships based on immediate self-interest. Her willingness to share information, acknowledge the expertise of her allies, and coordinate her actions with their professional obligations created foundations for collaboration that would sustain the relationships throughout prolonged and challenging proceedings. The development of trust within Caroline's alliance network required careful attention to confidentiality requirements, professional ethics, and the legitimate interests of all parties involved. Caroline's approach demonstrated respect for the professional obligations and ethical standards that governed her allies' activities, while ensuring that their collaboration would enhance, rather than compromise, their individual effectiveness and professional reputation. Caroline's coordination of activities among her various allies required sophisticated project management and communication skills that enabled her to maintain alignment of objectives while respecting the independence and expertise of each professional involved. Her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources, coordinate timing of various activities, and ensure that all parties remained informed about relevant developments demonstrated leadership capabilities that enhanced the effectiveness of the entire network. The strategic value of Caroline's alliance network extended beyond the immediate capabilities that each individual professional provided. The collaborative relationships created synergies that enabled the development of comprehensive strategies that would not have been possible through individual efforts alone. The combination of legal expertise, law enforcement authority, medical knowledge, financial analysis, and media capabilities provided Caroline with resources that matched or exceeded what Margaret could deploy through her own professional network. Caroline's alliance network also provided emotional support and professional validation that sustained her resolve throughout the challenging process of confronting a sophisticated adversary with significant resources. The confidence that experienced professionals expressed in her case, and their willingness to commit their reputations and resources to her cause, provided Caroline with reassurance that her objectives were both achievable and worthy of the personal risks and sacrifices that would be required.
The collaborative approach that Caroline developed with her allies also ensured that her case would establish precedents and create lasting change that would benefit the broader community, rather than simply achieving individual victory. The involvement of law enforcement professionals, medical experts, and advocacy organizations meant that the lessons learned from her confrontation with Margaret would be integrated into training programs, policy development, and public awareness campaigns that would protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation. Caroline's success in building strategic alliances demonstrated the fundamental principle that individuals who possess moral clarity and professional competence can inspire others to join their cause and contribute their expertise to achieving common objectives. Her ability to articulate her vision for justice, demonstrate her commitment to ethical principles, and coordinate complex activities while respecting the autonomy and expertise of her allies, created a model for effective collaboration that transcended the specific circumstances of her inheritance dispute. The alliance network that Caroline constructed represented more than simply the accumulation of professional resources and expertise. It demonstrated the power of shared values and common purpose to create collective capabilities that exceeded what any individual could achieve alone. The willingness of experienced professionals to commit their time, resources, and reputations to Caroline's cause reflected their recognition that her battle with Margaret represented broader principles of justice and community protection that warranted their support and involvement. Caroline's approach to building and maintaining these strategic alliances provided a foundation for achieving comprehensive victory that would address both her immediate legal challenges and the broader objectives related to exposing Margaret's predatory behavior and protecting other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation. The collaborative network that she developed would prove essential for implementing the complex strategies that would be required to defeat Margaret's sophisticated methods while establishing precedents that would deter similar attacks in the future. The implementation of Caroline's comprehensive strategy began with carefully orchestrated initial actions designed to test her alliance network, gather crucial evidence, and establish the foundation for more aggressive measures, while maintaining the element of surprise that would be essential for achieving maximum impact. These first strategic moves demonstrated Caroline's transformation from defensive victim to proactive advocate, while revealing the devastating effectiveness of coordinated professional expertise applied with moral clarity and strategic precision. Caroline's opening gambit was executed through her alliance with Detective Sarah Martinez, who initiated a preliminary inquiry into Margaret's financial activities under the guise of routine follow-up to the previously dismissed elder abuse allegation. This approach provided legal authority for examining records and conducting interviews that would have been impossible to obtain through private investigation alone, while ensuring that any evidence discovered would be admissible in both criminal and civil proceedings. The inquiry was structured to appear routine and non-threatening while systematically gathering intelligence about Margaret's methods, resources, and potential vulnerability. Detective Martinez's initial review of public records and financial databases revealed patterns of activity that exceeded Caroline's most pessimistic expectations about Margaret's systematic exploitation of elderly individuals. The investigation uncovered evidence that Margaret had been involved in inheritance disputes with at least 7 different elderly relatives over the past 2 decades, with each case following remarkably similar patterns of late-stage involvement in estate plan, allegations of special relationships that justified inheritance claims, and aggressive legal challenges that resulted in substantial settlements or court awards. The consistency of Margaret's methods across multiple cases provided compelling evidence that her activities represented calculated business operations, rather than legitimate family disputes motivated by grief or genuine concern for inheritance rights. The timing of Margaret's involvement in each case, the similarity of legal strategies employed, and the progression from initial contact to final settlement revealed a sophisticated system for identifying, targeting, and exploiting vulnerable elderly individuals and their families. Caroline's second strategic action involved her collaboration with forensic accountant Marcus Chen to conduct a comprehensive analysis of Margaret's financial situation and spending patterns over the past 5 years. This analysis was designed to identify sources of income that might be inconsistent with Margaret's claimed financial circumstances, while also tracing expenditures that might reveal evidence of her systematic approach to inheritance fraud. The financial investigation was conducted using techniques that ensured compliance with privacy laws, while maximizing the intelligence value of publicly available information. Marcus's analysis revealed financial patterns that provided stunning confirmation of Caroline's suspicions about Margaret's predatory activity. Margaret's income over the past 5 years had included substantial payments from estate settlements and insurance claims that coincided precisely with the deaths of elderly relatives and acquaintances. Her expenditures included payments to attorneys specializing in inheritance disputes, private investigators who conducted surveillance and background research, and various professionals who provided services related to estate planning and elder care coordination. Most significantly, Marcus's analysis revealed that Margaret had been systematically investing her inheritance-related income in ways that suggested long-term planning for continued activities in this area. Her financial portfolio included investments in companies that provided elder care services, legal databases that could be used for research on potential targets, and professional development activities related to estate law and financial planning. These expenditures indicated that Margaret had transformed elder exploitation into a sustainable business model that she intended to continue and expand. Caroline's third initial action involved her alliance with Dr. Rebecca Thompson to conduct a comprehensive review of Rose's medical records and cognitive assessments during her final month. This review was designed to establish definitive proof of Rose's mental competency and decision-making capacity, while also identifying any evidence of the manipulation or coercion that Margaret would likely allege in her inheritance challenge. Thompson's analysis would provide the medical foundation for defending Rose's estate planning decisions, while exposing the falsity of Margaret's anticipated claims about Rose's vulnerability to undue influence. Thompson's review of Rose's medical records revealed documentation that exceeded legal requirements for proving mental competency and voluntary decision-making. Rose's healthcare providers had conducted multiple cognitive assessments throughout her illness, all of which demonstrated that she had retained full decision-making capacity, despite her physical decline. The medical records also included detailed documentation of Rose's specific instructions about her estate planning objectives and her explicit rejection of attempts by various family members to influence her decisions. Most importantly, Dr. Thompson's analysis revealed evidence that Rose had been aware of and concerned about Margaret's apparent surveillance and manipulation attempts. Rose's medical records included notes about her request for additional privacy protections during medical appointments, and her specific instructions that certain family members should not have access to information about her medical condition or treatment plan. These records provided compelling evidence that Rose had recognized Margaret's predatory behavior and had taken deliberate steps to protect herself and her estate planning decisions from manipulation. Caroline's fourth strategic action involved her collaboration with investigative journalist Jennifer Walsh to begin developing public awareness about the broader implications of systematic elder abuse and inheritance fraud. This approach was designed to create social and political pressure for more aggressive enforcement of existing laws, while also warning other potential victims about the methods employed by predators like Margaret. Jennifer's initial reporting focused on the general patterns of elder exploitation without revealing specific details about Caroline's case that might compromise ongoing legal proceedings. Jennifer's preliminary research into elder abuse and inheritance fraud revealed that Margaret's activities were part of a much larger problem that affected thousands of elderly individuals and their families throughout the region. Her investigation uncovered evidence of networks of attorneys, healthcare providers, and financial advisors who specialized in facilitating inheritance challenges and elder exploitation schemes. The scope of the problem was far greater than Caroline had initially realized, with systematic exploitation generating millions of dollars in illegal profits while devastating families and destroying the security of vulnerable elderly individuals. The public awareness campaign that Jennifer initiated served multiple strategic purposes beyond simply exposing the problem of elder abuse. The media attention created pressure on law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies to take more aggressive action against systematic exploitation, while also alerting potential victims and their families to the warning signs of predatory behavior. Most importantly, the publicity established Caroline as a credible advocate for elder protection while positioning her legal battle with Margaret as part of a broader campaign for justice and accountability. Caroline's fifth initial action involved her coordination with attorney Jonathan Mitchell to file a comprehensive response to Margaret's inheritance challenge that went far beyond traditional defensive strategy. Instead of simply contesting Margaret's claims, Caroline's legal response included counterclaims for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of elder protection statute. This aggressive approach was designed to transform the inheritance dispute into a comprehensive legal proceeding that would address the full scope of Margaret's predatory behavior while establishing precedents that would protect other vulnerable elderly individuals. Jonathan's legal strategy also included requests for expanded discovery that would require Margaret to provide detailed information about her involvement in previous inheritance disputes, her financial relationships with various professionals who assisted in such cases, and her communications with other individuals who might be engaged in similar systematic exploitation activity. These discovery requests were designed to expose the full scope of Margaret's activities while gathering evidence that could be used for criminal referrals and additional civil litigation. The coordinated implementation of these initial actions demonstrated the power of Caroline's strategic alliance network while establishing momentum that would be crucial for achieving comprehensive victory in the prolonged battle ahead. Each action reinforced and amplified the others, creating synergies that exceeded what could have been achieved through individual efforts alone. The combination of law enforcement authority, forensic expertise, medical analysis, media attention, and aggressive legal strategy provided Caroline with advantages that Margaret had not anticipated and could not easily counter. The success of Caroline's initial actions also revealed the extent of Margaret's vulnerabilities and the weaknesses in her previously successful methods. Margaret's overconfidence in her established patterns had made her careless about protecting evidence and covering her tracks. Her assumption that Caroline would respond with conventional defensive strategies had left her unprepared for the comprehensive and coordinated attack that Caroline's alliance network was now implementing. Most importantly, the early results of Caroline's strategic actions provided compelling validation of her decision to transform from defensive victim to proactive advocate for justice. The evidence that was emerging through her coordinated investigation exceeded her most optimistic expectations about what could be proven regarding Margaret's systematic exploitation of elderly individuals. The scope of Margaret's predatory activities and the sophistication of her methods provided clear justification for the comprehensive approach that Caroline had developed. Caroline's initial actions also demonstrated her ability to coordinate complex activities among multiple professionals while maintaining strategic focus and tactical discipline. Her leadership of the Alliance Network showcased capabilities that had been developed through her professional experience and personal preparation but had never before been tested under such challenging circumstances. The confidence and effectiveness that she demonstrated in implementing these initial strategies provided foundation for the more aggressive measures that would follow. The momentum generated through Caroline's first strategic actions created psychological advantages that would be crucial for sustaining her campaign through the inevitable escalation of Margaret's opposition. The early successes in gathering evidence and building public support provided Caroline with confidence in her strategy, while demonstrating to Margaret that she was facing an opponent who possessed resources and capabilities that far exceeded what Margaret had encountered in her previous inheritance challenge. Caroline's initial actions had also established clear evidence that Margaret's inheritance challenge was motivated by systematic predatory behavior rather than legitimate family concerns. The patterns revealed through financial analysis, the documentation of Margaret's previous similar activities and the medical evidence of Rose's competency and autonomous decision-making created a compelling narrative that would be difficult for Margaret to counter through conventional legal strategy. The foundation established through these initial strategic actions positioned Caroline for the escalation phase of her campaign, when more aggressive measures would be implemented to expose the full scope of Margaret's criminal activities, while achieving comprehensive victory in the inheritance dispute. The success of her opening moves had demonstrated that her alliance network possessed the capabilities necessary to challenge Margaret's sophisticated methods, while her strategic approach had proven effective in gathering evidence and building momentum for the intensive battle ahead. The success of Caroline's initial strategic actions created momentum that required immediate escalation to maintain pressure on Margaret while preventing her from developing effective countermeasures to the coordinated investigation that was now revealing the true scope of her predatory activity. The escalation phase of Caroline's campaign was designed to force Margaret into defensive positions that would expose additional evidence of her systematic exploitation while demonstrating to the legal community and general public that this inheritance dispute represented something far more significant than a typical family disagreement over estate assets. Caroline's decision to escalate her actions was motivated by intelligence gathered through her alliance network indicating that Margaret was beginning to recognize the serious threat to her established operations and was mobilizing resources to mount more sophisticated opposition than she had deployed in previous inheritance challenge. Detective Martinez had received reports that Margaret was consulting with attorneys who specialized in defending against criminal charges, suggesting that she understood the potential for her
activities to result in prosecution rather than simply civil litigation. This intelligence confirmed that Caroline's strategy was achieving its intended effect of transforming Margaret's calculated attack into a defensive struggle for survival. The first major escalation action was implemented through Caroline's collaboration with Detective Martinez to formally request federal investigation of Margaret's activities under statutes governing elder abuse, mail fraud, and racketeering. This request was supported by comprehensive documentation that Caroline's Alliance Network had gathered during the initial investigation phase, including financial records demonstrating systematic patterns of inheritance fraud, medical evidence disproving Margaret's claims about elderly victims' mental incapacity, and communication records revealing coordination between Margaret and various professionals who assisted in her exploitation scheme. The federal investigation request represented a strategic escalation that transformed the scope of Margaret's legal jeopardy from civil liability to potential criminal prosecution with serious penalties including substantial prison sentences and asset forfeiture. The involvement of federal authorities also provided access to investigative resources and legal mechanisms that exceeded what could be achieved through state-level proceedings alone. Most importantly, the federal investigation established that Margaret's activities had attracted attention from law enforcement agencies with jurisdiction and resources necessary to address systematic criminal enterprise. Detective Martinez's presentation of the federal investigation request included detailed analysis of Margaret's pattern of targeting elderly individuals across multiple jurisdictions, evidence of her use of mail and electronic communications to coordinate her fraud scheme, and documentation of the financial enterprises that she had established to profit from systematic exploitation of vulnerable elderly individuals and their families. The request also included evidence of Margaret's coordination with other individuals who provided professional services that facilitated her inheritance fraud activities, suggesting the existence of criminal networks that warranted comprehensive federal investigation. Caroline's second escalation action involved her coordination with forensic accountant Marcus Chen to file formal complaints against Margaret with professional licensing boards governing attorneys, financial advisors, and healthcare providers who had assisted in her previous inheritance challenge. These complaints were supported by detailed financial analysis demonstrating that these professionals had received payments that appeared to be compensation for services that violated ethical standards and potentially criminal statutes governing professional conduct in elder care and estate planning context. The professional conduct complaints represented strategic escalation that threatened to destroy the network of professional assistance that had enabled Margaret's success in previous inheritance challenge. The potential loss of professional licenses and the reputational damage associated with formal ethics violations would significantly reduce Margaret's access to the specialized expertise that her sophisticated fraud schemes require. Most importantly, the professional conduct proceedings would create additional sources of evidence and testimony that could be used in both civil litigation and criminal prosecution. Marcus Chen's analysis for the professional conduct complaints revealed financial relationships between Margaret and various professionals that suggested systematic coordination rather than legitimate professional services provided in individual cases. The timing and amounts of payments to attorneys, private investigators, and healthcare consultants demonstrated patterns that were consistent with fee-splitting arrangements and other violations of professional ethics standards. The analysis also revealed that several professionals had received payments from Margaret in multiple cases involving different elderly victims, indicating ongoing business relationships that facilitated systematic exploitation rather than legitimate professional services. Caroline's third escalation action involved her alliance with investigative journalist Jennifer Walsh to publish comprehensive expose articles that detailed Margaret's systematic exploitation of elderly individuals while highlighting the broader problem of inheritance fraud throughout the region. These articles were strategically timed to coincide with the filing of federal investigation requests and professional conduct complaints, creating maximum public awareness and pressure for aggressive enforcement action while protecting the integrity of ongoing legal proceedings. Jennifer's investigative reporting revealed that Margaret's activities were part of a much larger problem affecting hundreds of elderly individuals and their families throughout Oregon and neighboring states. The articles documented specific cases where Margaret and similar predators had successfully stolen substantial inheritances through systematic manipulation of legal processes designed to protect legitimate inheritance. The reporting also exposed weaknesses in regulatory oversight and enforcement that had enabled such systematic exploitation to continue for extended periods without appropriate intervention. The public expose articles served multiple strategic purposes that extended beyond simply increasing awareness of elder abuse problems. The media attention created political pressure for legislative and regulatory reforms that would strengthen protections for elderly individuals and their families, while also deterring other potential predators who might be considering similar activity. Most importantly, the publicity established Caroline as a credible advocate for elder protection while demonstrating that her legal battle with Margaret represented broader principles of justice and community welfare rather than personal financial interest. Caroline's fourth escalation action involved her coordination with attorney Jonathan Mitchell to file expanded civil litigation that included claims against not only Margaret but also the various professionals who had assisted in her systematic exploitation activity. This expanded litigation strategy was designed to address the full scope of the criminal enterprise that had enabled Margaret's success while ensuring that all participants faced appropriate civil liability for their roles in systematic elder abuse and inheritance. The expanded civil litigation included claims for conspiracy, racketeering, and professional malpractice against attorneys, private investigators, healthcare providers, and financial advisors who had provided services that facilitated Margaret's inheritance fraud scheme. The litigation strategy also included requests for punitive damages and attorney fees that would ensure that victory in the civil proceedings would result in substantial financial consequences for all participants in the systematic exploitation enterprise. Jonathan's expanded litigation strategy also included coordination with class action procedures that would enable other victims of Margaret's systematic exploitation to join the legal proceedings and seek appropriate compensation for their losses. This approach was designed to maximize the financial and reputational consequences for Margaret and her associates while providing justice for all individuals who had been harmed by their systematic. Caroline's fifth escalation action involved her coordination with Rebecca Thompson to present medical evidence and expert testimony that would definitively establish Rose's mental competency and voluntary decision-making throughout her final months, while exposing the falsity of Margaret's claims about undue influence and manipulation. This medical evidence was strategically presented through multiple proceedings including the inheritance dispute, federal investigation, and professional conduct complaints to ensure maximum impact across all aspects of Caroline's comprehensive campaign. Thompson's medical analysis included comprehensive review of Rose's cognitive assessments, medication records, and healthcare provider observations that documented her mental clarity and autonomous decision-making capacity throughout the period when she was making estate planning decisions. The analysis also included expert opinion about the factors that would be necessary to establish undue influence or mental incapacity, demonstrating that Margaret's allegations were not supported by credible medical evidence and appeared to be fabricated for litigation advantage. The medical evidence presentation also included testimony from healthcare providers who had worked with Rose during her final months and could provide first-hand observations about her mental state, her understanding of her estate planning decision, and her explicit rejection of attempts by various family members to influence her choices. This testimony provided compelling evidence that Rose had been aware of Margaret's manipulation attempts and had deliberately structured her estate planning to protect her assets from such exploitation. The court coordinated implementation of these escalation actions created pressure on Margaret that exceeded what she had encountered in any of her previous inheritance challenges. The simultaneous development of federal criminal investigation, professional conduct proceedings, comprehensive civil litigation, and sustained media attention represented a multi-front assault that required resources and expertise that Margaret had not previously needed to deploy. Most importantly, the escalation actions demonstrated that Caroline possessed capabilities and determination that would sustain prolonged legal proceedings, regardless of the financial and procedural obstacles that Margaret might attempt to create. Margaret's response to Caroline's escalation actions revealed both the sophistication of her established methods and the limitations of her ability to adapt to unprecedented challenges. Her initial attempts to discredit Caroline through character assassination and procedural manipulation demonstrated that she was still relying on tactics that had been successful in previous cases where her opponents lacked Caroline's resources and strategic coordination. However, the evidence that Caroline's alliance network had gathered made Margaret's traditional approaches ineffective while exposing additional aspects of her systematic exploitation activity. The escalation phase also revealed that Margaret had been overconfident in her assessment of Caroline's capabilities and had underestimated the strength of the evidence that could be assembled to document her predatory behavior. Margaret's previous successes had been achieved against opponents who lacked Caroline's professional expertise, educational background, and systematic preparation for exactly this type of confrontation. The sophisticated methods that had enabled Margaret's previous victories now became liabilities that provided additional evidence of her systematic approach to inheritance fraud. Caroline's successful escalation of her campaign demonstrated the power of coordinated professional expertise, applied with strategic precision and sustained by moral clarity about the objectives being pursued. The transformation of a defensive response to an inheritance challenge into a comprehensive campaign for justice and accountability showcased capabilities that exceeded what Margaret had encountered in her previous cases, while establishing precedents that would protect other vulnerable elderly individuals from similar exploitation. The momentum generated through Caroline's escalation actions positioned her for the decisive phases of her campaign, when the full scope of Margaret's criminal activities would be exposed and appropriate consequences would be imposed through coordinated legal proceedings. The success of the escalation phase confirmed that Caroline's strategic approach was achieving its intended objectives, while demonstrating that systematic predatory behavior could be effectively challenged when confronted by individuals who possessed the knowledge, resources, and determination necessary to seek comprehensive justice and accountability. The critical moment that would determine the ultimate outcome of Caroline's comprehensive campaign against Margaret's predatory enterprise arrived during the third week of December, when the convergence of multiple legal proceedings and investigative activities created circumstances that required extraordinary courage and strategic precision. The turning point emerged when Margaret, recognizing the existential threat to her criminal operation, deployed resources and tactics that exceeded anything she had previously employed, while simultaneously exposing vulnerabilities that would enable Caroline to achieve decisive victory through coordinated action across all fronts of their multifaceted confrontation.
The crisis began when Caroline received intelligence through Detective Martinez, indicating that Margaret had retained the services of Vincent Kellerman, a disgraced former federal prosecutor who specialized in defending individuals accused of sophisticated white-collar crimes. Kellerman's involvement represented a significant escalation in Margaret's defensive capabilities, while also confirming that she recognized the serious criminal jeopardy that Caroline's investigation had created. Kellerman's reputation for aggressive tactics, procedural manipulation, and character assassination indicated that Margaret was prepared to employ methods that went far beyond conventional inheritance dispute strategies. Caroline's intelligence network also revealed that Margaret had begun liquidating assets and transferring funds to offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for banking secrecy and resistance to international law enforcement cooperation. These financial movements suggested that Margaret was preparing for the possibility of criminal prosecution and potential asset forfeiture, while also positioning herself to flee the country if legal proceedings developed in ways that threatened her freedom. The urgency of these financial transfers indicated that Margaret understood the comprehensive nature of the threat she faced and was implementing contingency plans that she had apparently developed for such circumstances. The immediate danger to Caroline's campaign emerged when Kellerman filed emergency motions in federal court, alleging that Caroline's investigation activities constituted harassment, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. These motions requested temporary restraining orders that would halt the federal investigation, suppress evidence that had been gathered through Caroline's alliance network, and impose sanctions against Caroline and her legal representatives for allegedly exceeding appropriate boundaries in civil litigation. Kellerman's strategy was designed to neutralize Caroline's investigative capabilities while creating legal complications that would consume her resources and attention. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.